Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku took over as the protector of Central City. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world dissolved into a cacophony of wrongness. One moment, Izuku Midoriya, Deku, was on the fractured asphalt of downtown Mizudafu, the familiar scent of ozone from his own power mingling with the acrid smoke of destruction. The next, he was nowhere, and everywhere. Colors that had no names screamed past his vision. Sounds tore at his ears, the auditory equivalent of grinding glass against chalkboard, magnified 1,000 times. His body felt like it was being unraveled, each cell pulled in a different direction by an impossible gravity. The fight had been going so well. The villain, a wiry man in a cheap suit calling himself Manifold, possessed a quirk named spatial discord. It wasn't clean, precise teleportation. It was a messy, violent act of tearing reality open, folding it over on itself like a cheap map, and punching through to another point. Every warp he created left behind shimmering, unstable aftershocks, pockets of distorted space that warped light and sound. Deku, now solidly in his second year at UA, had been holding a steady 45% of One for All, a feat that would have shattered his bones to powder just a year ago. Now, it was a manageable inferno thrumming beneath his skin. Green lightning, a living extension of his will, danced around him, a stark contrast to the grimy urban battlefield. He's unpredictable. Tenya Ida's voice, crisp and authoritative, crackled through his comms. Ida was a blue and silver blur in the distance, his recipro burst evacuating a bus full of civilians trapped by a collapsed overpass. His warp points don't have a consistent exit vector. I'm trying to pin him down. Achiko Uraraka called out, her cheeks flushed with effort. She was touching chunks of debris, splintered concrete, twisted rebar, and sending them floating into the air, creating a confusing, zero-gravity minefield to box Manifold in. But he just slips through everything. Deku saw it too. Manifold wasn't fighting them. He was playing with them, delighting in the chaos. He'd appear on a rooftop, cackling as he bent the space around a water tower until it groaned and ruptured, then vanished just as Deku launched himself skyward. Enough running! Deku roared, planting his feet. He saw his opening. Manifold had just reappeared in the center of the street, gloating at the police cordon. Behind the villain, Uraraka was trying to get a clear line of sight, and Ida was racing back to rejoin the fight. They were too close. You heroes are all the same. So much power, so little imagination. Manifold shrieked, spreading his arms wide. The air around him began to shimmer, not with the usual warp signature, but with something darker, more violent. The very fabric of space began to tear, a jagged, inky fissure splitting the world open. It wasn't a doorway. It was a wound. Get back! Deku screamed, his danger sense blaring like a fire alarm in his skull. This was different. This was wrong. The energy pouring from the rift felt ancient and hungry. Manifold cackled, his eyes wide with madness. Let's see how you handle a taste of true chaos. An unraveled seam between worlds. The rift expanded with a deafening roar, a sound like the universe itself tearing in half. It began to pull, a gravitational vortex that wasn't just pulling matter, but light, sound, everything. Uraraka cried out as she lost her footing, the debris sheet floated now being sucked towards the tear. Ida, caught mid-stride, dug his armored heels into the asphalt, engines whining as he fought the pull. They weren't going to make it. In that split second, 1,000 simulations ran through Deku's mind. He saw the path. He saw the cost. He didn't hesitate. Channeling One for All into his legs, he exploded forward. He was a green comet, a blur of righteous fury. He didn't go for the villain. He went for his friends. Uraraka! Ida! He slammed into them, a controlled, desperate tackle. He wrapped one arm around Ida's armored waist and the other around Uraraka, using his own momentum and a burst from his legs to throw them clear of the vortex's primary pull. They tumbled through the air, landing hard but safe, dozens of meters away. Deku, however, was now at the epicenter. He tried to anchor himself with Black Whip, tendrils of dark energy lashing out to find purchase, but they dissolved into nothingness as they touched the edge of the rift. The pull was absolute. He felt his feet lift from the ground, the world spinning away from him. He caught a final glimpse of his friends' horrified faces, their mouths open in a silent scream he could no longer hear over the dimensional din. It's okay, he thought, a strange sense of calm washing over him. They're safe. That's what matters. Then the wound in the world swallowed him whole, and Izuku Midoriya knew no more. Pain was the first thing to register. A deep, seismic ache that started in his bones and radiated outwards. It felt like he'd been put in a blender, then reassembled by a blind man in a hurry. His head throbbed with a vicious, pulsating rhythm, and the metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. He was lying on something cold and wet, surrounded by the stench of stale garbage and decay. He forced an eye open. Darkness. No, not complete darkness. A single, bare bulb flickered high above, casting long, dancing shadows across grimy brick walls. An alleyway. He had crashed into a large, dented metal dumpster, the impact having mercifully broken his fall. Where am I? He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. His costume, the beloved gamma suit that Mayhatsum had poured so much effort into, was in tatters. The right shoulder plate was gone, the fabric beneath it shredded. The metal guards on his legs were bent and twisted, and his mask was cracked down the middle. He felt a wave of dizziness and leaned against the cold brick, taking a ragged breath. The air was different. The sounds were different. Muzutafu, like any major city, had a constant hum of activity. But this was something else. The distant wail of a siren had a different pitch. The language he could faintly hear from the main street was English, crisp and clear. He was fluent, thanks to present mixed rigorous classes, but hearing it as the dominant language was deeply unsettling. But the most profound difference was a silence he couldn't hear, but could feel. It was a fundamental emptiness in the world around him. In his world, with 80% of the population possessing a quirk, there was an ambient, psychic energy. A low-level thrum of millions of unique powers coexisting. It was a background noise he had never even consciously registered until it was gone. Here, there was nothing. A void. It felt like stepping into a soundproof room after a lifetime spent at a rock concert. The sudden quiet was deafening, chilling him more than the damp air. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his consciousness. Okay, Midoriya, think, he muttered to himself, his voice a raw croak. Analyze the situation. Manifold's quirk. Did it teleport me? Across the country? Across the world? He stumbled out of the alley, squinting against the harsh glare of streetlights and neon signs. The architecture was unfamiliar, a mix of old Art Deco buildings and sleek, modern glass towers. The cars were different, the license plates alien. He saw a newspaper stand, the headline in bold English, Central City mourns, 1 month without the Flash. Central City? The Flash? The names meant nothing to him. A cold dread, heavier than any physical injury, settled in his stomach. This wasn't just another city. This wasn't even his world. The dimensional rift, it hadn't just moved him. It had thrown him sideways. Just as that terrifying realization began to sink in, a chorus of screams erupted from down the street. A police car swerved to a halt, its lights painting the scene in frantic strokes of red and blue. People were running from a large, ornate building with the words Central City Trust Bank carved above its marble columns. And standing on the steps, bathed in the flashing lights, was a man in a garish, multicolored jester costume, holding what looked like a giant, weaponized yo-yo. He was flanked by 2 thugs in cheap ski masks, both armed with rifles. "Fear not, my dreary citizens," the man in the costume declared with a theatrical bow. "The trickster is merely making a withdrawal to fund his next grand performance. Your compliance is your ticket to the show." Deku saw 2 police officers taking cover behind their car, their pistols drawn but hesitant to fire with hostages still stumbling out of the bank. The trickster cackled, pressing a button on a remote. A volley of rubber chickens shot out from a hidden launcher on the bank's roof, exploding in clouds of thick, pink smoke that sent the officers coughing and sputtering. This was insane. It was absurd. A villain who used exploding poultry. Deku was injured, lost, and possibly stranded in another dimension. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to find a place to hide, to recover, to figure out what was happening. But then he saw a little girl trip and fall, right in the line of sight of one of the gunmen. Her mother screamed, trying to get to her. The thug leveled his rifle, and in that instant, all the fear, all the confusion, all the pain vanished. It was replaced by the singular, burning drive that had defined his entire life. The voice of All Might echoed in his soul. A hero is someone who saves people with a smile. There was no choice. There never was. Green lightning, faint but defiant, began to crackle around him. The emptiness of this world didn't matter. The ache in his bones was irrelevant. Someone was in danger. He pushed off the wall, his battered legs coiling with power. He dialed it back, way back. He didn't know the structural integrity of these buildings, the tensile strength of this world's asphalt. He settled on a manageable 15% of One for All, a gentle hum compared to the roaring inferno of 45%. To the CCPD officers, to the trickster, to everyone on that street, it wasn't gentle at all. One moment, there was nothing but chaos. The next, a flash of green lightning streaked from the mouth of the alley. The trickster was in the middle of a monologue about the corrupt banking system when a shockwave hit him. It wasn't an explosion. It was a solid wall of force, a localized hurricane that slammed into his two henchmen, sending them flying backwards into the bank's revolving doors with enough force to shatter the glass and knock them unconscious. Their rifles clattered uselessly to the pavement. What the was all the trickster managed before a green blur resolved itself in front of him. It was a boy. A teenager, maybe, in a wrecked green costume that looked like some kind of combat armor and a rabbit-themed mask. His green eyes blazed with an intensity that made the trickster's blood run cold. "That's enough," Deku said, his voice low and steady. "A new hero? In my city?" The trickster scoffed, recovering his bravado. "Didn't anyone tell you? The headliner's gone. This town belongs to the supporting cast now, and you, my boy, are about to be written out of the script." He whipped his arm, sending his giant yo-yo, which was probably packed with explosives, spinning directly at Deku's face. Deku didn't even flinch. He simply raised his right hand, curled his middle finger back against his thumb, and flicked. It was a simple motion, almost casual. But backed by 15% of One for All, it displaced the air in front of his finger with phenomenal force. The air cracked with a sound like a bullwhip. A tiny, invisible bullet of compressed atmosphere shot forward and struck the yo-yo mid-flight. The reinforced steel weapon crumpled like a tin can and was blasted backwards, hitting the trickster squarely in the chest. The villain let out a choked gasp, his eyes bulging, before he collapsed in a heap, out cold. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 seconds. Silence descended on the street, broken only by the whimpering of a few terrified hostages and the distant, approaching sirens. Deku stood over the unconscious trickster, the green lightning flickering and dying around him as he powered down. He quickly scooped up the little girl, who was staring at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, and deposited her safely in her mother's arms. The two CCPD officers slowly rose from behind their car, their guns still raised, but their faces a mixture of shock and awe. Drop to your knees. Put your hands in the air," one of them shouted, his voice trembling slightly. Deku looked at them, then at his own trembling hands. The adrenaline was fading, and the full extent of his exhaustion and injuries was crashing back down on him like a tidal wave. He was in a foreign land, surrounded by people who spoke a language he understood but had no context for, who were pointing weapons at him. He was a hero, but to them, he was just another dangerous unknown. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say. In the heart of Central City, SDR Labs was a tomb. The cortex, once the vibrant, bustling nerve center of Team Flash, was quiet. The holographic displays were dormant, the med bay was pristine and empty, and a profound stillness hung in the air. For a month, it had been their sanctuary and their prison, a monument to the man they had lost. Iris Westallen sat at the main console, staring at a blank screen. She was supposed to be writing an article for her blog, a piece about resilience, about the city's spirit. But the words wouldn't come. How could she write about hope when her own felt so hollow? Barry was gone, vanished into the Speed Force during the last crisis, sacrificing himself to save them all. The city felt his absence like a missing heartbeat. Caitlin Snow was in her medical lab, running diagnostics on a blood sample for the 10th time. She needed the distraction, the cold, hard data, a welcome reprieve from the messy, unpredictable nature of grief. She and Frost had been through so much, but this loss felt different. It was a foundational crack in the world they had built. Cisco Ramon, the heart and soul of the team, was slumped in his chair in the workshop, surrounded by half-finished projects. The playful spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He hadn't named a gadget or made a pop culture reference in weeks. The joy was gone, sucked out of the building along with the crackle of the Speed Force. Suddenly, a blaring alarm shattered the silence. Red lights flashed across the cortex, a jarring intrusion into their shared morning. Iris shot up from her chair. Cisco, what is that? On the main screen, a massive energy signature had appeared downtown. It wasn't a metahuman they recognized. It wasn't Speed Force energy. It was something else entirely. A colossal spike of what looked like biokinetic energy. It flared into existence, held steady for a few seconds, and then vanished. Cisco was already at his console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Whoa. Okay, that's new. Readings are off the charts. It's not tachyon, it's not dark matter, it's biological, but the power output is astronomical. It spiked, and then disappeared. Another one? Caitlin asked, walking into the cortex with a weary sigh. God, the city can't handle another Zoom or Devo right now. No, wait, Cisco said, his brow furrowed. There it is again. A much smaller spike, but a sustained one. Right near Central City Trust Bank. It lasted 4.8 seconds. And then, gone. He pulled up the CCPD dispatch chatter. Reports of a new meta, green lightning, stopped the trickster. The three of them stared at each other. Green lightning. A new meta. It could be a threat. It could be another villain trying to fill the power vacuum left by the Flash. But it could also be something else. The city is vulnerable, Cisco, Iris said, her voice finding a sliver of its old strength. The rogues are testing the waters. The police are overwhelmed. We have to check this out. Cisco hesitated. Going out into the field felt wrong without Barry. It felt dangerous. But Iris was right. Their grief didn't absolve them of their responsibility. Barry had entrusted this city to them. Okay, he said, grabbing the keys to the SDR Labs van. Caitlin, you're with me. Medical gear. Just in case. Iris, stay on comms, be our eyes and ears. It was a pale imitation of their old routine, a ghost of a memory, but it was something. It was a start. They arrived on the scene to find the CCPD cordoning off the area. The trickster and his goons were being loaded into an ambulance. The bank's entrance was a wreck, but their attention was drawn to the alleyway where the energy signature had originated. They found him there, leaning against the wall, his strange green costume torn and bloody. He was just a kid, maybe 16 or 17, with a wild mop of green-black hair and a face full of freckles. He was pale, sweating, and swaying on his feet. He looked up as they approached, his green eyes wide with a mixture of pain, fear, and utter confusion. Hey, are you okay? Caitlin asked, her voice soft, her doctor's instincts taking over. You're the one who stopped the trickster? Deku stared at them. He understood the words, but his brain felt like it was swimming in syrup. The woman had kind eyes. The man standing behind her had a concerned look on his face. They weren't police. The van behind them had a strange star-like logo. He started, his voice barely a whisper. The world was starting to tilt, the edges of his vision going dark and fuzzy. The dimensional travel, the fight, the strain on his body, it was all catching up to him at once. He was running on empty. Whoa, easy there, Cisco said, stepping forward as Deku's knees buckled. Deku tried to stay upright, tried to stay conscious. He had to figure this out. He had to get home. But his body had made its decision. The fight was over. He had nothing left. The last thing he saw before the world faded to black was the concerned face of the woman and the logo on the side of the van, a white circle, with a lightning bolt streaking through it. Then, darkness claimed him completely. The first sensation was not one of pain, but of its absence. The deep, grinding ache in his bones, the feeling of cellular disruption from his violent journey, had receded. It was replaced by a strange, humming warmth, a feeling of knitting and mending that seemed to originate from the very marrow of his bones. He was lying on something soft, the air around him smelling of antiseptic and ozone. A rhythmic, steady beeping echoed in the quiet room, a comforting counterpoint to the chaos that still swirled in his memory. Izuku Midoriya's eyes fluttered open. He was staring at a white acoustic tile ceiling. He tried to sit up, a reflexive action, but a gentle pressure on his shoulder stopped him. Easy now, a calm, feminine voice said. You've been through a lot. Your body is still recovering. He turned his head. The woman from the alley was there, standing beside his bed. She had auburn hair and kind, intelligent eyes that were currently fixed on a monitor displaying a series of complex biological readouts. He was in some kind of advanced medical bay. The equipment humming around him was sleek and futuristic, far beyond anything he'd seen even in Recovery Girl's infirmary. He was shirtless, a series of small, circular sensors attached to his chest and temples. His tattered gamma suit was folded neatly on a chair nearby, a sad relic of a world away. His cellular regeneration is astounding, the woman murmured, more to herself than to him. Lacerations and severe contusions that should have taken weeks to heal are already in the final stages of tissue granulation. His metabolic rate is off the charts. It's like his cells are supercharged. Izuku pushed himself up onto his elbows, the lingering stiffness in his muscles a dull reminder of his ordeal. Where am I? The woman looked at him, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. I'm sorry, I don't understand. Just then, 2 more people entered the med bay. One was the man from the alley, who had a friendly, open face and was wearing a t-shirt with a complicated physics equation on it. The other was a woman with a sharp, determined expression and a reporter's inquisitive gaze. He's awake, the man said, a wave of relief washing over his face. Whoa, easy there, dude. We don't speak, whatever that is, the language barrier. Of course. Izuku's mind, finally clearing from the fog of exhaustion, latched onto the problem. Panic was useless. Analysis was key. He took a slow breath, marshalling the English he'd learned from President Mike. It was textbook, a little formal, but it would have to do. I can speak English, he said, his voice a little hoarse. The 3 figures in the room visibly relaxed. My apologies. Where am I? The woman with the inquisitive gaze stepped forward. You're in SDR Labs. In Central City. We brought you here after you collapsed. My name is Iris Westallen. This is Caitlin Snow, she gestured to the doctor, and Cisco Ramon. You took a pretty nasty dimensional header, man, Cisco said, his curiosity overriding his caution. We detected the energy signature when you arrived. It was like nothing we've ever seen. And then what you did at the bank, how did you do that? The power output was insane, but it wasn't Speed Force. The words came at him in a rush, a jumble of unfamiliar terms. SDR Labs. Speed Force. He shook his head, trying to focus. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I think I am from another world, another dimension. The trio exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of disbelief, but of weary recognition. For them, it seemed, cross-dimensional visitors weren't an entirely new concept. Okay, Iris said, pulling up a stool and sitting down, her expression softening. Okay, Izuku. Let's start from the beginning. Tell us everything. The conversation that followed was slow and halting. The immediate language barrier was gone, but the conceptual one was immense. Izuku tried to explain his world, a world where superhuman abilities, or quirks, were the norm. He spoke of UA High, a school dedicated to training the next generation of pro-heroes. He talked about his own quirk, One for All, a power passed down from one user to the next, a sacred torch of hope. He spoke, with reverence and a touch of sadness, about its greatest champion, All Might, the symbol of peace. To his surprise, they listened without mockery. Caitlin, the scientist, asked pointed questions about the biological mechanisms of quirks. Iris, the journalist, was fascinated by the societal implications of a hero-based system. And Cisco, the engineer and self-proclaimed nerd, was practically vibrating with excitement. Whoa, back up, Cisco interrupted as Izuku described the UA Sports Festival. So you're telling me, in your world, the X-Men are basically real, and you have government-sanctioned schools that teach teenagers how to be the Avengers? That is certifiably awesome. I don't know those names, Izuku admitted, feeling a fresh wave of displacement. But yes, it is a society built around heroes. Then, it was their turn. Iris took the lead, her voice colored by a deep, personal grief that Izuku recognized instantly. She spoke of their world, a world without quirks, but not without wonders, or dangers. She explained that 7 years ago, the SDR Lab's particle accelerator had exploded, bathing Central City in a wave of exotic dark matter. The accident had created metahumans, people gifted with extraordinary abilities. Most people were scared, Iris explained. The world changed overnight. We needed a symbol. We needed someone to show us that these powers could be used for good. And we got one. She looked towards Cisco, who tapped a few commands into a tablet. A holographic screen flickered to life in the center of the room. The image was grainy at first, a security camera feed from a downtown street. A car was careening out of control, heading straight for a crowd of pedestrians. And then, he appeared. It wasn't a streak of green lightning, but a bolt of pure scarlet and gold. A figure in a sleek, crimson suit, a lightning bolt emblem emblazoned on his chest. He moved with an impossible, liquid grace, a blur that seemed to be in a dozen places at once. He wasn't just fast, he was speed itself. In the space of a single heartbeat, the figure pushed every person out of the car's path, dismantled the vehicle piece by piece to slow its momentum, and deposited the unconscious driver safely on the sidewalk before the chassis had even finished skidding to a halt. He moved with a precision and control that took Izuku's breath away. His own power was a sledgehammer, a barely contained explosion of force. This was a surgeon's scalpel, moving at the speed of light. We called him the Flash, Iris said, her voice thick with emotion. His real name was Barry Allen. He was my husband. The screen changed, showing a montage of the Flash in action. He was running up the sides of skyscrapers, phasing through solid walls to rescue people from burning buildings, creating powerful vortexes with his arms to suffocate fires, and outthinking villains who could control the weather or manipulate minds. He wasn't just a powerhouse. He was a brilliant, versatile, and hopeful presence. In every clip, after the danger was past, he would pause for a second, offering a reassuring word or a thumbs up to a grateful citizen before vanishing in a trail of golden lightning. He was their all might. Izuku watched, utterly captivated. His analytical mind, the one that had filled dozens of notebooks, kicked into overdrive. His velocity must exceed Mach 20, at least, to counteract that building's collapse. The phasing ability suggests control over his own molecular frequency, a conscious application of quantum tunneling. The way he uses friction and air pressure, it's incredible. He was the best of us, Caitlin said softly, her eyes glued to the screen. But in our last battle, against a villain who could manipulate gravity, Barry had to run faster than he ever had before to counteract a singularity that would have swallowed the whole city. In doing so, he ran right into the Speed Force. The Speed Force? Izuku asked, the term pulling him from his analytical muttering. It's the extra-dimensional energy source that gave him his powers, Cisco explained, his voice losing its usual cheerful cadence. It's a whole other plane of existence. He's not dead, we don't think, but he's gone. Trapped. And the city lost its hope. The weight of their story settled on Izuku like a physical thing. He looked from their grieving faces to the heroic image of the Flash frozen on the screen. He understood now. They hadn't just saved a stranger, they had found a potential solution. They saw his power, his drive to help, and they were hoping he could be a replacement. The pressure was immense. It was the same crushing weight he felt every time he looked at his scarred hands and thought of All Might's legacy. But this was different. This wasn't a legacy he had inherited, it was one he had stumbled into. He was an interloper in another hero's story, an accidental stand-in for a man who had clearly been a legend. How could he possibly live up to that? He was just Deku, the clumsy, crying boy who broke his bones. Even now, with better control, he was still just a student. he wasn't the Flash. He wasn't All Might. Before he could voice his overwhelming doubt, the same jarring alarm that had announced his own arrival blared through the lab, yanking them all back to the present. "What is it this time?" Iris asked, her voice tight with tension as she rushed to the main console in the Cortex. Cisco's fingers danced across his keyboard, pulling up security feeds and emergency service reports. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Mick's out for a stroll." "Mick?" Izuku asked, sliding off the medical bed. Caitlin handed him a simple gray SDR Labs sweatshirt and sweatpants, which he gratefully pulled on. "Mick Rory calls himself Heatwave," Cisco said, his face grim as he projected a new image onto the main screen. It showed a large, bald man in a heavy-duty parka, despite the mild evening weather. He was holding a gun-like device that was spewing a torrent of incandescent fire at the side of a building. "Pyromaniac, thief, general pain in the neck. Member of the Rogues, a lovely little club of Central City's most persistent criminals. His heat gun isn't normal fire. It projects concentrated infrared radiation, capable of reaching temperatures that can melt steel." The location tag on the screen read, Keystone Chemical Processing Plant. Izuku's blood ran cold. A fire villain at a chemical plant. That was a recipe for a catastrophe. "The CCPD are on their way, but they can't get close," Iris reported. "The heat is too intense. He's not trying to steal anything. It looks like he's just burning things. He's testing us," Caitlin realized. With Barry gone, the Rogues are getting bold. They want to see how the city responds without the Flash. They all fell silent. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. The police were outmatched. The city had no protector. Except for the superpowered, dimensionally displaced teenager standing in their med bay. "You can't be serious," Caitlin said, turning to Izuku. "You're still recovering. We don't know the full extent of your injuries, or what that dimensional travel did to you." "She's right, Izuku," Iris added, her voice laced with concern. "We can't ask you to do this. It's not your fight." But it was. Izuku looked at the screen, at the roaring flames, at the tiny figures of firefighters being driven back by the inferno. It didn't matter what dimension he was in. It didn't matter if he was scared or out of his depth. People were in danger. The rest was just noise. "There are workers in that plant," Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm. He walked over to the chair and picked up the tattered remains of his costume. The metal plates were bent, the fabric torn, but it was still his. It was still him. "I have to go." Cisco looked at Iris, who gave a slow, reluctant nod. Barry would have done the same. "Okay," Cisco said, his demeanor shifting into a more professional, focused state. "Okay, new guy. Your suit's in no condition for a fight, but we don't have time to make you a new one. I'm hooking you up with our comms. I'll be your eyes and ears from here. The plant's layout is coming up on your screen now." A holographic display of the chemical facility appeared in the air. "There are 3 primary hazardous material storage tanks on the east side. If he breaches those, the whole block goes up. Your priority is civilian evac and containing Rory." "Got it?" "Got it," Deku said, pulling on his battered gauntlets and the cracked remains of his mask. It felt familiar. It felt right. The rush of wind was a welcome sensation. Leaping across the rooftops of Central City, with Cisco's voice a reassuring presence in his ear, Izuku felt a sliver of normalcy return. This, he understood. The mission, the target, the stakes. "Okay, Emerald Comet, we need a better name. You're about 2 blocks out," Cisco's voice crackled. "Heat signatures show Rory is on the 2nd floor catwalk near the main processing vats. And I'm reading at least a dozen life signs still trapped on the upper floors." "Roger that," Deku replied, pushing off a rooftop and soaring through the air, landing silently on the roof of the chemical plant. The heat was immense, a physical wave that washed over him. Below, flames licked up the side of the building, thick black smoke billowing into the night sky. He found an access hatch and dropped down into the building's interior. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning chemicals. Emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows down the corridors. He could hear the distant, panicked shouts of the trapped workers. Civilians first, he thought, pushing one for all to 20%. The green lightning flared around him, illuminating the smoky hallway. He became a blur of motion, racing up stairwells, kicking down jammed doors, and gathering the terrified workers. He carried 3 at a time, his strength making light work of it, depositing them with the paramedics a safe distance from the building before rocketing back inside. Within 2 minutes, all 12 workers were safe. Now for the villain. He knows you're here, Cisco warned. Energy readings from his heat gun are spiking. Deku burst into the main processing chamber. It was a cavernous room filled with massive steel vats and a network of catwalks. And there, in the center of it all, was Heat Wave, a sadistic grin on his face. Well, Mick Rory growled, his voice a low rumble. Looks like the Flash got himself a little green sidekick. Let's see if you're as flammable as you look. Without another word, he unleashed a torrent of fire. It wasn't a projectile. It was a wide, sweeping wave of pure heat that turned the very air into a shimmering weapon. Deku reacted on instinct. He dropped low and launched himself forward, aiming for a direct confrontation. Detroit smash. He didn't connect. He punched the air in front of him, unleashing a massive shockwave designed to blow the flames back and knock Heat Wave off his feet. It was a tactic that had worked 100 times before, but Heat Wave wasn't a brawler. He simply angled his gun downwards, blasting the metal floor of the catwalk. The steel glowed cherry red and began to melt, a molten river of slag cutting off Deku's path. The shockwave from his smash dissipated against the superheated air. Cute trick, Rory sneered, firing again. Not at Deku, but at a series of pipes running along the ceiling. They burst, releasing a torrent of non-flammable but vision-obscuring steam. Deku was fighting blind. He couldn't just charge in. His straightforward, overwhelming power was useless against an opponent who refused a direct fight, who used the environment itself as a weapon. Izuku, watch your left. Cisco yelled in his ear. He's flanking you. Deku spun, raising his arms in a defensive block just as a jet of fire shot out of the steam. It wasn't a direct hit, but the sheer radiant heat was staggering. It slammed into his right arm, and he cried out in pain. The fabric of his sweatshirt, and the already damaged gauntlet beneath it began to smolder and blacken. The pain was sharp and searing, a deep burn that his healing factor would struggle with. He gritted his teeth, leaping backwards onto a lower platform. This wasn't working. This wasn't a Yui training exercise. Heat Wave wasn't trying to win a fight. He was just creating chaos. And then Deku saw it. Through a momentary gap in the steam, he saw Heat Wave aiming his gun not at him, but at one of the massive, primary storage tanks Cisco had warned him about. A red placard on its side had a skull and crossbones and the word flammable. There was no time to think. No time for a strategy. He pushed his power to 30%, the pain in his arm momentarily forgotten. He launched himself across the room, a desperate, flying tackle. He was fast. But the fire was faster. A concentrated beam of heat struck the tank just as Deku slammed into Heat Wave, sending both of them tumbling off the catwalk. The side of the tank began to glow, a circular patch of angry red that buckled inwards. A high-pitched whine filled the air as the pressure inside skyrocketed. It was going to blow. Deku ignored the dazed villain at his feet. He looked at the tank, his mind racing. He couldn't punch it. That would only rupture it faster. He couldn't cool it down. He looked up. Directly above the tank was a massive water reservoir for the facility's emergency sprinkler system. An idea, born of desperation, sparked in his mind. He sprang to his feet, leaped onto the railing of the catwalk, and then launched himself upwards, straight towards the ceiling 20 meters above. He channeled one for all into his right leg, the one that wasn't as battered. Manchester. Smash! He brought his axe kick down on the ceiling right next to the water tank's main valve system. The concrete and steel shattered under the focused impact. With a tremendous groan of tortured metal, the multi-ton water tank tore free from its moorings and plummeted downwards. It landed squarely on top of the compromised chemical tank with a cataclysmic crash. The chemical tank ruptured, but its contents were instantly doused by thousands of gallons of water, creating a foul-smelling but harmless plume of steam instead of a city-leveling fireball. Deku landed amidst the deluge, panting, his body screaming in protest. He had saved the city block, but in the chaos, Heat Wave had vanished. He was gone. He stood alone in the wreckage, water and foam cascading around him. He looked down at his arm. The sleeve was burned away, revealing an angry red burn on his forearm. His suit was in even worse shape than before. He had saved the civilians. He had prevented the explosion. But he had let the villain escape. He had won the battle, but it felt, undeniably, like a loss. Staring into the smoky abyss of the ruined plant, Izuku Midoriya came to a stark and painful realization. In this new world, with these new villains, just being strong wasn't going to be enough. The journey back to SDR Labs was a silent, suffocating affair. Deku sat in the back of the van, the metallic tang of smoke and his own failure coating his tongue. The searing pain in his arm was a dull throb now, thanks to a hastily applied burn salve from Caitlin, but the wound to his pride was raw and gaping. He hadn't just been beaten, he'd been outmaneuvered, outthought. He had acted like a blunt instrument against an opponent who required surgical precision, and the result was a villain's clean getaway and a multi-million-dollar chemical plant in ruins. When they entered the cortex, the tension followed them like a shroud. Caitlin immediately guided him back to the med bay, her expression a mixture of clinical focus and deep-seated worry. "Sit," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. She began to carefully cut away the charred remnants of his sweatshirt and the melted slag of his gauntlet. "Third-degree burns across your forearm. The fact that your skin isn't completely carbonized is a testament to your suit's material and your own biology. Any normal person would be in shock, looking at months of skin grafts." Iris and Cisco stood in the doorway, their faces etched with concern. "You did good, Izuku," Iris said, her voice soft. "You saved everyone. You prevented a disaster. That's a win." "She's right, man," Cisco added, trying for a reassuring tone. "Mick's slippery. Even Barry had trouble pinning him down sometimes. We'll get him next time." Their words, meant to comfort, only served to twist the knot of failure in his gut tighter. They didn't understand. A next time meant the villain was still out there, free to endanger more people. He had failed in his primary duty. "No," Deku said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He wasn't looking at them. He was staring at his own bandaged arm, at the evidence of his mistake. He slid off the medical bed and began to pace the small room, a caged, restless energy radiating from him. No, it wasn't a win. It was a tactical failure from the outset. I miscalculated. I was inefficient. Caitlin paused, her hands hovering over a tray of medical instruments. "Izuku, you can't be so hard on yourself." But he wasn't listening. His gaze had turned inward, his eyes unfocused, replaying the entire fight in his mind's eye at 1,000 times the normal speed. And then, he began to mutter. The initial approach was flawed. I treated him like a villain with a strength-enhancing quirk, like Muscular or a Nomu, where overwhelming force is the most direct path to victory. But Heat Wave isn't a brawler. His weapon isn't a simple flamethrower, it's a directed energy device. Cisco said it projects infrared radiation, so it's not about the mass of the fire, it's about the intensity of the heat transfer. A shockwave from a smash would just dissipate against the superheated, low-density air. It's like trying to punch smoke. It was a wasted move, cost me 3 seconds and valuable energy. He started gesturing with his hands, tracing invisible diagrams in the air. His strategy wasn't to engage me, it was to control the battlefield. He used the environment. The melting catwalk wasn't an attack, it was area denial. The steam burst wasn't a smokescreen, it was sensory deprivation. I was constantly reacting to his moves, never forcing him to react to mine. I was playing his game. I was on the defensive from the moment I entered the room, even when I was the one attacking. Iris, Cisco, and Caitlin exchanged bewildered glances. They had seen Barry get lost in his own head, his mind moving too fast for his mouth to keep up, but this was different. This wasn't the frantic energy of a speedster. This was the obsessive, microscopic deconstruction of a grandmaster chess player analyzing a lost match. The gun, Deku continued, his muttering growing faster, more intense. The heat gun is the key. Everything originates from it. It must have a power source. Is it internal? A battery pack? Or does it draw ambient energy? Unlikely. Probably a compact cold fusion cell, given the output. It must have a cooling system to prevent the weapon from melting its own housing. If I could identify the location of the coolant intake, or the power cell, a targeted, low-percentage Air Force flick could potentially disable the weapon without a full confrontation. Black Whip could have been used for disarming, but the steam obscured my line of sight, which was his intent. A rookie mistake. I should have cleared the steam first. A wide arc, low-power Delaware smash would have created a vortex to vent the room, giving me a clear visual. Then Black Whip to the weapon, immobilize, and the fight is over in 10 seconds. Instead, I charged in. Reckless, he finally stopped pacing and turned to face them, his green eyes burning with a fierce, self-critical fire. I treated a tactical problem like a strength problem. That's why he escaped. That's why the plant was so badly damaged. It was my fault. The silence in the med bay was absolute. The 3 members of Team Flash stared at him, their initial confusion melting away into a profound, dawning sense of awe. They had seen his power, his brawn. They had witnessed his raw, world-breaking strength. But this was the first time they were seeing the brain. A mind that was just as powerful, just as formidable, as the quirk that powered his body. Cisco was the first to speak, a slow whistle escaping his lips. Whoa. Okay. So, you're not just the Hulk. You're Bruce Banner, too. At the same time, Iris's eyes lit up with a sudden realization, a spark of the investigative journalist she was. She saw it now. They had been trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. They had thrown him at a problem with no context, no information. They had given him a target, but not the intelligence he needed to form a true strategy. You're right, she said, her voice firm, cutting through the lingering tension. It was a tactical failure. Ours. Not yours. She turned and strode out of the med bay into the cortex. Come with me, Izuku. Hesitantly, Deku followed, with Cisco and Caitlin trailing behind. Iris sat at the main console, her fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. She pulled up a secure, encrypted server, the CCPD's criminal database, cross-referenced with her own extensive articles from the Central City Citizen and, most importantly, Barry's own case files. We gave you a monster to fight, but we never showed you how to hunt it, Iris said, gesturing to the massive screen. Mugshots and profiles began to fill the display. There was Mick Rory, scowling at the camera. A man in a high-tech parka holding a cold gun. A woman on golden roller skates. The trickster in his ridiculous costume. This is the rogues, she explained. Captain Cold, Heat Wave, Mirror Master, Weather Wizard, Golden Glider, the trickster. They're not like the villains you've described from your world. They aren't trying to conquer the world or end society. They're thieves. Most of them, anyway. They're professionals. She pulled up a file on a man named Leonard Snart, Captain Cold. Snart was their leader. He established their code. It was simple, but it's what made them different. Rule 1, no killing, unless it's absolutely necessary. Especially not women or children. Rule 2, the score is the score. No senseless destruction. You get in, you get the prize, you get out. Rule 3, everyone gets an equal cut. They were a dysfunctional, blue-collar family of criminals. Izuku listened, his mind absorbing every detail, a new kind of fire replacing the shame in his eyes. This was information. This was data. This was what he needed. Barry understood that. Iris continued, her voice softening at the mention of his name. He knew he couldn't just punch them. He had to outthink them, dismantle their plans, appeal to the sliver of code they still lived by. It was a game of chess, every single time. She turned to him. We want you to have access to everything. Every police report, every case file Barry and the team compiled, every article I ever wrote. Study them. Understand them. Don't try to be the Flash. Be you. The person who just broke down that entire fight. Cisco, catching on, rushed to a storage closet and returned with a brand new, leather-bound notebook and a pen. It was a simple gesture, but to Izuku, it felt like being handed a key. He took the notebook, his fingers tracing the SDR Labs logo embossed on the cover. He opened it to the first clean, white page. With a determined hand, he wrote across the top, Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 14, Central City Dimension. For the next several hours, the cortex was silent save for the quiet hum of the servers and the furious scratching of Izuku's pen. He was a whirlwind of focus, his eyes darting between the holographic files and the pages of his notebook. He sketched Captain Cold's gun, theorizing about its absolute zero projection technology. He drew diagrams of Weather Wizard's staff, postulating how it manipulated atmospheric pressure. He broke down the trickster's gadgets, analyzing their psychological impact as much as their physical threat. He filled pages with notes, theories, potential weaknesses, and counter-strategies, his muttering a low, constant hum of intellectual energy. Team Flash watched him, content to work quietly in the background. For the first time since Barry had vanished, a flicker of genuine hope ignited in the lab. It wasn't the hope of getting their hero back, but the hope of forging a new one. The alarm that sounded 2 days later was different. It wasn't the frantic blare of a fire or a robbery in progress. It was a silent, pulsing alert on Cisco's metahuman activity map. Weird, Cisco said, leaning closer to his screen. I'm getting localized dimensional shearing at the top of the cord tower. Not a breach, just fluctuations. And multiple 911 calls are coming in from inside. People are saying they're trapped. Izuku was on his feet in an instant, his new notebook left open on the table. Cord tower? It's the tallest skyscraper in the business district. All glass and steel. He pulled up the building schematics from memory. What's the nature of the threat? That's the thing, Iris said, monitoring the police channels. There is no threat. No demands, no violence. People are just stuck. They walk towards a window or a door, and they just bounce off an invisible wall. Others say they're walking down a hallway that never ends. The profile Izuku had been studying just that morning flashed in his mind. He ran to the console. Show me the security feed from inside. Cisco patched it through. The image was disorienting. A panicked businessman ran towards the building's main entrance, but as he reached the glass doors, his reflection stepped out to meet him. The reflection was solid. It pushed him back, its movements a perfect, mirrored inversion of his own. In another feed, a woman was trapped in her office, her panicked face reflected in the polished surface of her desk, the window, even the screen of her phone. Every reflective surface had become a prison wall. Sam Scudder, Izuku breathed, his eyes wide. Mirror Master. He can travel through any reflective surface and pull people into a mirror dimension, Caitlin confirmed, reading from the file on the main screen. But this is different. He's not pulling them in, he's trapping them out. He's inverted the connection, Izuku deduced, his mind racing. He's turned the entire building into a one-way mirror. From the inside, every reflection is a solid barrier to the real world. A perfect prison with invisible walls. The CCPD had arrived on the scene, surrounding the gleaming skyscraper, but they were utterly helpless. One officer tried to shatter a ground-floor window with a sledgehammer. The moment the hammer struck, a sickening crackle of energy echoed from within, and every hostage inside the building cried out in pain, clutching their heads. It's a feedback loop, Cisco realized. The mirror surfaces are linked to the hostages' biosignatures. Trying to break the glass is like taking a hammer to their skulls. Brute force is off the table, the perfect puzzle. It couldn't be solved with a punch. It was a test, designed for a mind like Barry Allen's. But Barry wasn't here. Izuku stared at the screen, his gaze sweeping over the schematics, the security feeds, his own hastily scribbled notes on Scudder. Controls entry and exit points. Manipulates reflection, not reality itself. The trap is the building's reflective nature. So, don't use the building. A plan, audacious and complex, began to form in his mind. Cisco, I need you to find the source of his control. He has to be projecting from a central point, a primary mirror, Izuku said, already strapping on his gauntlets. His suit was still damaged, but Caitlin and Cisco had patched it up as best they could, reinforcing the seams. Iris, I need you to get the CCPD to clear the airspace around the tower. Caitlin, be ready for mass medical transport. We're getting everyone out. How? Iris asked. You can't go through the doors or the windows. A small, determined smile touched Deku's lips. I'm not going through them. I'm going over them. The air at 400 meters was thin and cold. Izuku stood on the roof of the adjacent skyscraper, the wind whipping at his tattered costume. Below, the cord tower gleamed, a beautiful, deadly prison of glass. He could see the faint outlines of people pressed against the windows, their faces masks of terror. Okay, Izuku, I've got a lock, Cisco's voice said in his ear, a welcome anchor in the dizzying height. Scudder's broadcasting his mirror field from the main boardroom on the 80th floor. It's got a floor-to-ceiling chrome mirror. Classic villain lair. But the whole building is a fortress. How are you getting them out? Like this, Deku replied. He took a deep breath, focusing. A gentle green aura enveloped him. He pushed off the roof and simply floated. Float, the quirk of Nanashimada, was still the one he had the least control over, but his time here, his constant analysis, had improved his mastery. He wasn't flying. He was carefully controlling his own buoyancy, drifting across the gap between the buildings like a forgotten green balloon. He landed silently on the roof of Cord Tower. He was in. Phase 1 was complete. He ran to the edge, peering down. A woman was on the balcony of a penthouse suite on the 90th floor, frantically pounding on the glass sliding door, her own reflection staring back at her, mocking her. Ma'am! Deku called down. Please step back from the door. The woman looked up, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of the boy in the green hero costume standing on the roof. She stumbled backwards. Now for Phase 2. Deku planted his feet, channeling power into his arms. Dark, ethereal tendrils of energy, far thicker and more controlled than they had been just months ago, erupted from his hands. Black Whip. One tendril shot down, wrapping securely around the balcony's railing. Two more snaked out, wrapping around the woman's waist and under her arms, forming a gentle but unbreakable harness. Hold on! He yelled. With a grunt of exertion, he pulled. The woman screamed as she was lifted off the balcony, soaring 100 meters into the air. Deku swung her in a wide, graceful arc, depositing her gently onto the roof of the building he had just left, where a CCPD tactical team was waiting. He didn't waste a second. He began to work his way down the building, floor by floor. Black Whip became an extension of his will, a fluid, dynamic rescue tool. He pulled people through windows he had carefully kicked open, making sure not to shatter the glass, creating complex pulley systems on the fly to lower groups of office workers to safety on the streets below. He was a one-man evacuation crew, a green spider spinning a web of salvation against the sheer glass cliff face of the skyscraper. He moved with a quiet, focused efficiency that left the onlookers below, and team flashed back in the lab, utterly speechless. Within 20 minutes, every hostage was out. The building was empty, except for one. All right, Scudder, Deku muttered, pulling himself up to the 80th floor. My turn. He kicked open a window and entered the boardroom. It was a disorienting nightmare. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine, the long chrome table, the floor, the ceiling, and the massive wall mirror that Cisco had identified. His reflection stared back at him from 1,000 different angles. A figure stepped out of the main mirror, a cocky smirk on his face. Impressive trick with the ropes, kid. But you're in my world now. Every angle is my angle. Every reflection is a weapon. You can't even touch me. Dozens of mirror master copies flickered into existence, surrounding him. Deku stood his ground, his breathing steady. He remembered his notes. His power is based on light, on reflection. So, what happens when you disrupt the medium? He wouldn't play Scudder's game of chasing reflections. He would break the game itself. He held up his right hand, just as he had against the trickster, curling his middle finger against his thumb. But this wasn't for a brute force impact. This required finesse. He needed to generate a specific, high-frequency sonic pulse. He focused, channeling a tiny, precise thread of one for all. It's not about breaking the glass, Deku said, his voice calm and clear, echoing in the silent room. It's about changing the frequency. He flicked his finger. There was no deafening crack, no explosion. Instead, a low hum filled the air, rapidly rising in pitch until it was a nearly inaudible, piercing whine. A visible ripple, like a stone dropped in a pond, shot through the air from his fingertip. It wasn't an attack. It was a resonance wave. The moment the wave hit, the world warped. The 1,000 reflections in the room flickered like a dying television screen. The mirror master copies dissolved into static. The very air seemed to vibrate. Scudder, the real one, cried out, clutching his head as his control over the mirror dimension shattered. The sonic frequency was disrupting the harmonic connection that allowed him to phase between worlds. The massive chrome mirror behind him rippled like liquid, and with a violent splash of distorted light, it spat him out. Sam Scudder landed in a heap on the floor, groaning, the fight completely gone from him. Deku walked over, black whip tendrils snaking out to bind the disoriented villain. The fight had been won without a single punch thrown. Back at SDR Labs, the team watched the final moments on their screen in stunned silence. Cisco finally leaned back in his chair, a wide, genuine grin spreading across his face for the first time in a month. "Okay," he said, a newfound respect in his voice. "The kid's not a speedster. He's not a bruiser. He's a one-man tactical team. A Swiss Army knife of kicking ass." Iris looked at the screen, at the young hero standing tall amidst the chaos he had so elegantly solved. The city's news feeds were already exploding with eyewitness videos, grainy phone footage of the Emerald Comet soaring between buildings, saving dozens. For the first time, she saw it clearly. He wasn't living in Barry's shadow. He was casting his own. When Deku returned to the lab, exhausted but upright, the atmosphere was completely different. The somber tension was gone, replaced by a buzzing, positive energy. "That," Cisco said, clapping him on the shoulder, "was epic. Float plus Black Whip? Dude, we have got to come up with a name for that combo. The Green Grapple? The Spider Deku?" Deku just smiled, a tired but genuine expression. He felt the familiar ache in his limbs, the drain of using his quirks, but it was a good ache. It was the feeling of a job well done. He looked at the faces of his new friends, at Cisco's excitement, Caitlin's relieved smile, Iris's proud gaze. He was still lost, still a universe away from home. The weight of All Might's legacy and the scarlet shadow of the Flash were still there. But standing here, in this strange lab, in this unfamiliar city, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since he'd arrived. Hope. He wasn't a replacement. He wasn't a substitute. He was Izuku Midoriya. And for the first time, he truly believed that in this world, that might just be enough. The victory over Mirror Master had left a tangible shift in the atmosphere of SDR Labs. The oppressive blanket of grief, while not gone, had been lifted just enough for light to filter through. Laughter, a sound that had been absent for a month, echoed in the cortex as Cisco excitedly replayed the footage of Deku's unorthodox evacuation of Cord Tower. For Izuku, however, the victory was bittersweet. He sat in the med bay, nursing a fresh set of bruises, clad in a borrowed SDR Labs sweatshirt that felt 3 sizes too big and impossibly foreign. He looked at the sad, shredded pile of his gamma suit on a nearby table. It was more than just a costume. It was his identity, a gift from Mayhatsum, a symbol of his journey. Now it was a ruin. "You're staring at that thing like you lost a pet," Cisco said, leaning against the doorframe, a tablet tucked under his arm. His usual playful smirk was back, and it was a welcome sight. "It's just," Izuku began, his voice trailing off. "It's important. It has history." "I get it," Cisco said, his expression softening with genuine understanding. "It's a part of you. Which is why you can't go out there again looking like you lost a fight with a paper shredder." He pushed off the doorframe and walked into the room, his eyes gleaming with the manic, creative energy that was his hallmark. "I've been running simulations since you got here, analyzing your power output, your fighting style, your everything. Your quirk, one for all, isn't like Barry's speed. It's not about frictionless movement. It's about managing catastrophic levels of kinetic force. You're a living, breathing cannon. You don't need a sprinter suit. You need armor." He tapped his tablet, and a holographic schematic sprang to life between them. It was a suit, undeniably inspired by his own, but refined, upgraded, and reimagined. "So check it," Cisco began, his words tumbling out in a rush of excitement as he zoomed in on different parts of the design. "The base layer is a modified version of Barry's suit. A silicon-based, friction-proof fabric, perfect for high-speed movement and heat resistance. But that's just the underwear. Over that, we've got a tri-weave of reinforced carbon fiber and a micro-lattice of dwarf star alloy, courtesy of a little gift from a friend up in Star City. It's light as a feather but has the tensile strength to withstand a direct hit from a wrecking ball. It'll help your body absorb the inertial blowback from your own smashes. Deku stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and humility. It was the most advanced piece of hero equipment he had ever seen. May would have a field day. The design follows your original, Cisco continued, tracing the lines of the suit with his finger. We're keeping the green and black aesthetic, 'cause it's your brand, but we're darkening the green to a more tactical, forest shade. The black lines aren't just for show, they're lines of energy distribution, channeling the excess power away from your joints. And your gauntlets, he zoomed in on the arms, are getting a major overhaul. Pressurized air cushioning system to absorb impact, reinforced with the same alloy. You can punch through a building, and these things will barely register a scratch. Cisco, this is too much, Izuku stammered, overwhelmed. I can't ask you to. You didn't ask. I offered, Cisco cut in, his expression serious. You're putting your life on the line for our city. The least we can do is give you a decent uniform. Besides, he grinned, I haven't had a new suit to build in a year. You have no idea how cathartic this is. Izuku's hero nerd brain finally kicked in, overriding his modesty. The soles of my boots, they need to be stronger. My shoot style puts most of the strain on my legs and feet. Already on it, Cisco said, pulling up a new schematic. Iron soles, just like your old ones, but these are forged from the same dwarf star composite. We're also adding kinetic energy absorption pads. The harder you kick, the more stable they become. He swiped to the head. And the mask. Aerodynamic, integrated comms, full-spectrum optical sensors, and of course. He added the final touch to the design, 2 long, ear-like appendages. The signature bunny ears. Couldn't leave those out. A genuine, heartfelt smile spread across Izuku's face. They're styled after All Might's hair. I figured it was something like that, Cisco said softly. Legacies are important. He looked at Izuku. One last thing. The name. We can't keep calling you the new guy. On the comms, I was calling you Emerald Comet. But what's your actual hero name? Izuku hesitated. He looked down at his hands, a flicker of old pain in his eyes. It's Deku. Cisco raised an eyebrow. Deku? What's that mean? He who smashes good? It's a Japanese word, Izuku explained quietly. It means useless. Or one who can't do anything. There was a boy I grew up with. He gave me that name when we were kids, because I was born without a quirk. The jovial atmosphere in the room evaporated. Caitlin and Iris, who had been listening from the doorway, looked at him with profound sympathy. But then, Izuku continued, a small smile returning to his face as he thought of his best friend, a friend of mine. She told me that the same word could also be a shortening of Dikairu, which means you can do it. She changed its meaning for me. She made it my own. So I took it. To prove that a name doesn't define you. You define the name. Cisco was silent for a long moment, his usual quippy demeanor gone. He looked at the earnest, powerful, and unbelievably resilient teenager in front of him. Well, he said, his voice full of a newfound respect. In this city, Deku is about to mean the guy you really don't want to mess with. The suit was ready the next day. It rose from a platform in Cisco's workshop, a masterpiece of tactical design and heartfelt engineering. The forest green was deep and serious, the reinforced black plating giving it a powerful, armored silhouette. The gauntlets were formidable, the iron soles gleamed under the workshop lights, and the mask was a perfect blend of his old design and their new technology. As Izuku put it on, it felt less like a costume and more like a second skin. It felt right. The morning after the Cord Tower incident, Central City was buzzing. News channels ran grainy cell phone footage on a loop, showing a green-clad figure soaring between skyscrapers, weaving intricate webs of dark energy to pluck people from their glass prisons. Social media was a firestorm of speculation and eyewitness accounts. Green Hero and Cord Tower Rescue were trending worldwide. The city, which had been holding its breath for a month, finally had something to cheer about. At her desk in the bustling offices of the Central City Citizen, Iris West Allen stared at a blank page on her monitor, the cursor blinking expectantly. The city was desperate for a narrative, for a story to make sense of the new, incredible events. As the foremost chronicler of the age of metahumans in Central City, that responsibility fell to her. She had to get this right. It wasn't just about reporting the facts. It was about shaping the myth. Barry had been the Flash, a name that spoke of his impossible speed, his fleeting, miraculous presence. He was a streak of lightning, a symbol of impossible hope. But this new hero, he was different. He wasn't fleeting. He was a force. When he arrived, you felt it. The ground shook. The air cracked. He was tangible, solid, an undeniable presence of overwhelming power. Her fingers began to move across the keyboard. For a month, Central City has lived in a shadow. Not a shadow of fear, but of absence. The scarlet light of hope that once streaked through our streets was gone, leaving a void that felt both immense and eternal. We were a city adrift. But last night, a new light appeared in our sky, not a flash, but a slow, deliberate burn. A steadfast emerald glow. She paused, rereading the words. She thought back to what Cisco had called him on the comms. It was perfect. He has been seen before, a green blur of incredible strength. But last night, in the face of an impossible crisis at Cord Tower, we saw who he truly is. He is not a speedster. He is not a phantom who solves problems in the blink of an eye. He is something else. He is a force of nature, as tangible and awesome as a thunderstorm, as brilliant and undeniable as a shooting star. When he soars through the air, he is not a blur. He is a comet, trailing green lightning in his wake. She wrote for over an hour, detailing the events with journalistic integrity, but coloring the narrative with the sense of awe and relief the city so desperately needed. She didn't reveal his origins or his connection to SDR Labs. He was a mystery, a guardian who had appeared when he was needed most. She wrote about his power, but focused more on his intelligence, on the brilliant, non-violent solution he had engineered. She ended the piece with a new name, a headline for this new chapter in the city's history. The Emerald Comet, a new hope for Central City. The article went viral. By noon, every news outlet in the city had picked up the name. The Emerald Comet. It was grand, mythic, and perfectly captured the public's imagination. On the streets, however, another name was taking hold. The people he'd rescued, the witnesses who had seen his suit up close, had noticed the letters emblazoned on his belt buckle, Deku. Unaware of its Japanese origins, they adopted it as a term of endearment. It was shorter, grittier, more personal. He became a hero with two names, the Emerald Comet to the world, and Deku to the people he saved. The SDR Labs rooftop had always been Barry's favorite spot. It was quiet, high above the noise of the city he loved, a place where he could think. Lately Izuku had found himself drawn to it as well. He stood at the edge, fully garbed in his new suit, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the sprawling metropolis. The city was beautiful, a vibrant tapestry of lights and life. It was also a crushing weight. He used to do that, too, a soft voice said from behind him. Izuku turned to see Iris approaching, two steaming mugs in her hands. She offered one to him. Hot chocolate. The sweet, warm aroma was comforting. He'd come up here after a tough day, she continued, standing beside him at the ledge. He just watched the city. Said it reminded him of what he was fighting for. She looked at him, her gaze knowing. You have the same look in your eyes. Like you're carrying the whole world on your shoulders. Izuku looked down into his mug, the steam warming his face. 2 worlds, maybe, he said quietly. In my world, I inherited the power of the greatest hero who ever lived. All Might. He was everyone's symbol of peace. He saved people with a smile, no matter how scared he was. The pressure to live up to that, it's overwhelming. He took a breath, the confession tumbling out of him. And now I'm here. In the city? Barry's city. He was your All Might, wasn't he? Another perfect hero, another impossible standard. How do you stand in a giant's shadow and not get lost in it? Iris was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Barry wasn't perfect, Izuku, she said softly. He was brilliant and good and so fast. But he was also stubborn, and reckless, and full of self-doubt. There were times he thought he wasn't fast enough, or smart enough. Times he failed. Times he wanted to give up. She turned to face him, her expression earnest. Do you know what his real superpower was? It wasn't the speed force. It was his heart. It was his absolute refusal to stop trying. He got knocked down more times than I can count, but he always got back up. Usually with a goofy smile on his face and a terrible excuse for being late. A sad smile touched her lips. Hope isn't about never failing, Izuku. It's not about being perfect or living up to an impossible legacy. Hope is about getting back up. It's about looking at a city full of people who are counting on you and finding the strength to try one more time. You don't have to be Barry Allen. You don't have to be All Might. You just have to be Izuku Midoriya. You have to get back up. From what I've seen, you're already an expert at that. Her words hit him with more force than any physical blow. They settled deep in his soul, a soothing balm on the raw, insecure parts of himself he rarely showed anyone. He looked at her, at this woman who had lost everything and was still standing here, teaching him about hope. Thank you, Iris, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. Anytime, Comet, she replied, gently bumping her shoulder against his. They stood in comfortable silence for a while longer, two souls bound by the legacies of giants, watching the city lights blink on as darkness fell. In the weeks that followed, Deku became a fixture of Central City. Clad in his new suit and guided by Team Flash, he threw himself into the work of being a hero. The city's criminal element, emboldened by the Flash's absence, provided him with no shortage of opportunities. He stopped a carjacking near the docks, using Black Whip to neatly pluck the vehicle out of traffic and deposit it back on the road before the thief even knew what was happening. He intervened in a hostage situation at a downtown jewelry store, using a 5% finger flick to shatter the gunman's pistol in his hand without harming him. He rescued a kitten from a tree for a tearful old woman. His use of float a gentle, amusing spectacle for the neighborhood kids. Each small victory built his confidence. He was learning the rhythm of this new city, the unique texture of its problems. He was faster, more efficient, his analysis before each engagement allowing him to resolve conflicts with increasing precision. The public adored him. The Emerald Comet was a symbol of strength, while Deku was their friendly neighborhood hero. But he wasn't the Flash. And the city had a brutal way of reminding him of that. The call came in on a Tuesday afternoon. A new metahuman, calling himself Gridlock, was attacking the central power substation. His power was simple and dangerous. He could absorb and redirect massive amounts of electricity. When Deku arrived, Gridlock was a living Tesla coil, crackling with stolen energy, threatening to overload the city's entire power grid. You can't get close to him. Caitlin's voice warned over the comms. The electrical discharge is lethal, and if you hit him with a direct physical attack, you'll just ground all that energy through your own body. Deku landed on a nearby rooftop, his mind racing. He analyzed the situation. Gridlock wasn't just drawing power, he was creating a powerful electromagnetic field around himself. A direct assault was out. A projectile attack might be conducted right back at him. Disruption, he thought. I can't attack the man, but I can attack the field. He crouched low, channeling a controlled 15% of one for all into his arm. He wasn't aiming at Gridlock himself, but at a point in the air about 2 meters to his left. He needed to create a concussive blast, a pocket of high-pressure air that would violently disrupt the EM field without making physical contact. A precision Delaware smash. He fired. The blast was perfect. A cannonball of air shot forward, invisible and precise. The EM field around Gridlock warped and collapsed, and the villain, suddenly cut off from his power source, let out a yelp as the stolen electricity discharged harmlessly into the ground. He collapsed, unconscious, the threat neutralized. A clean, efficient victory. Or so he thought. The shockwave from his smash, however, didn't just stop at the EM field. The remaining force, still incredibly potent, slammed into the massive transformers of the substation behind Gridlock. There was a deep, groaning sound of protesting metal, a shower of sparks, and then a series of deafening explosions. One by one, the transformers blew, sending plumes of acrid black smoke into the sky. Deku watched in horror as the lights in the surrounding city blocks flickered and died. An entire 5-block radius, including a major hospital, was plunged into darkness. Traffic lights went out, causing immediate gridlock and the screech of tires. The triumphant feeling of victory evaporated, replaced by a sickening, cold dread. He stood amidst the chaos he had created, the villain defeated at his feet, but surrounded by a far greater problem. Fire trucks and utility vans swarmed the area. He could hear the distant, panic sound of hospital backup generators kicking in. From the street below, he heard a frustrated motorist yell, "Great, just great." The Flash would have handled that clean, without blowing up the whole neighborhood. The comment, casual and angry, struck him like a physical blow. Later that night, back at SDR Labs, he watched the news report. A rival news network had a churn running across the bottom of the screen. The anchor, a woman with a severe haircut and a critical tone, was interviewing a city councilwoman. "And while we are grateful to the so-called Emerald Comet for neutralizing the immediate threat," the councilwoman said, "we cannot ignore the millions of dollars in damages and the immense public safety risk caused by his methods. Central City needs a hero who is not only powerful, but precise. The question we must now ask ourselves is this new hero a savior, or is he simply another, more chaotic brand of menace?" The camera zoomed in on a shot of the darkened city blocks, a stark image of his failure. Izuku turned away from the screen, the weight of the two worlds, of the two legacies, crashing down on him once more. He had a new suit. He had a new name. But he had just learned the hardest lesson of all. In a city that was used to a miracle, just being a hero was sometimes not enough. In the cold, sterile quiet of a disused cryogenics lab on the industrial outskirts of Central City, Leonard Snart watched the news report on a flickering, stolen television. His face, usually a mask of detached, icy cool, was set in a thoughtful frown. He took a slow sip of a lukewarm beer, the condensation dripping onto the frost-rimmed table before him. The newscaster's critical words about the Emerald Comet echoed in the cavernous room, but Snart wasn't listening to her. He was watching the footage. He replayed the clip of the substation battle for the 10th time, his pale blue eyes narrowed in intense analysis. He saw the green hero, this Deku, land. He saw the focused power, the intelligent targeting of the electromagnetic field. It was a smart move, a tactician's move. But then he saw the aftermath. The concussive blast, a clumsy, sledgehammer-like force, continuing its path to wreak havoc on the surrounding infrastructure. Power without control. Strength without finesse. A cannon where a scalpel was needed. For weeks, Snart had been observing. He'd watched the new hero from the shadows, a ghost in the city he considered his own personal hunting ground. He'd seen the raw, world-breaking force used on the trickster. He'd heard the whispers about the brilliant, non-violent resolution with Scudder. And now he saw this, a hero who could outthink a problem but whose solution caused a bigger one. This wasn't the Flash. Not even close. Barry Allen had been a frustrating, persistent, and infuriatingly noble adversary. But he was, above all, predictable. Their conflict was a dance, a well-rehearsed waltz of cops and robbers with super-powered flair. Snart would plan a job, Barry would show up to stop it. Snart would use his cold gun, Barry would use his speed. There were rules, an unspoken code that governed their interactions. It was a game. And while Snart played to win, he always knew the shape of the board. This new player hadn't just flipped the board, he'd smashed it to pieces. His raw, untamed power made their usual hit-and-run tactics obsolete. How could you plan a clean getaway when the hero could level the building you were robbing? How could you execute a precise, timed heist when the opposition moved with the subtlety of an earthquake? The old rules no longer applied. A new game required a new strategy. And Leonard Snart was, if nothing else, a master strategist. He finished his beer, set the bottle down with a decisive clink, and pulled out his phone. It was time for a family reunion. The meeting took place in the back room of a dingy, smoke-filled bar frequented by the city's lowlifes. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer and regret. One by one, the rogues filed in, drawn by Snart's summons. Mick Rory, Heatwave, was the first to arrive. He stomped into the room, his heavy frame radiating a palpable aura of irritation. He was still smarting from his encounter with the new hero, the memory of being tossed aside like a ragdoll a fresh wound to his volatile pride. "This better be good, Snart," he grumbled, slumping into a chair. I was in the middle of a very promising bonfire. Sam Scudder, Mirror Master, materialized from the polished surface of a beer tap, coalescing into solid form with a faint shimmer. He looked shaken, his usual cocksure swagger replaced by a haunted, nervous energy. His defeat at Cord Tower had been absolute, a psychological dismantling that left him unnerved. "He's not right," Scudder muttered, avoiding eye contact. "The way he took me down, it wasn't about power. He broke my connection. He got inside my head." Mark Martin, the weather wizard, drifted in next, a small, localized fog bank dissipating around him as he closed the door. His face was grim. He had seen the substation footage. He understood what uncontrolled power looked like. Finally, Lisa Snart, Golden Glider, skated into the room on wheels of shimmering gold light, a phantom of grace and danger. She phased through the closed door and came to a stop beside her brother, her arms crossed. "All right, Len. You got us all here. What's the score?" Snart waited until the door was shut and the room was secure. He looked at the faces of his crew, his family, in their own dysfunctional way. He saw anger in Mick, fear in Sam, caution in Martin, and loyalty in Lisa. "The score," Snart began, his voice a low, commanding rumble that cut through the tension, "is that the game has changed. The Flash is gone. In his place we have this Comet." "He's a kid," Mick scoffed. "A strong kid, but still just a kid. I had him on the ropes." "No, you didn't," Snart countered, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. "You had him confused. He prevented you from blowing up a chemical plant, and you barely escaped. He learns fast. Scudder can attest to that. 1 week, he's a brawler. The next, he's a tactician who can take you down without throwing a punch." Scudder flinched at the mention of his defeat. "I've been watching him," Snart continued, pacing slowly in the cramped space. "He's got the strength of a god, the mind of a detective, and the finesse of a wrecking ball. He's unpredictable, and that makes him dangerous. Not just to us, but to the city. To the way things work." He stopped and looked at each of them. "Our usual jobs, a bank here, an armored car there, they're too small, too risky now. The potential for collateral damage, for one of us to get seriously hurt by this kid's wild power, is too high. The old rules of engagement are over." "So what are you saying, Len?" Lisa asked, her voice quiet. "We pack it in? Retire to a beach somewhere?" A slow, cold smile spread across Snart's face. "The opposite. We're not running. We're not hiding. We're adapting. If the game has changed, we change the stakes. No more small scores. We go for one last big one. A job so audacious, so perfectly planned that it sets us up for life. One and done." He gestured to a rolled-up blueprint on the table. He unfurled it, revealing the detailed architectural plans for the Central City branch of Cord Industries. Not the office tower, but their secure, off-site research and development facility. "Cord's RD division," Snart announced. "They've just completed a prototype for a next-generation atmospheric condenser. It's a device capable of pulling moisture out of the air on a massive scale, designed to combat droughts. A piece of tech like that would be worth a fortune on the black market." Martin's eyes lit up with professional interest. "An atmospheric condenser. With my staff I could." "Precisely," Snart cut him off, a glint in his eye. "But we're not just going to walk in and grab it. This plan is different. It's not designed to beat the kid. It's designed to break him, to use his own heroic instincts against him." For the next hour, Snart laid out the plan. It was a masterpiece of criminal orchestration, a symphony of chaos where each member of the Rogues was a vital instrument. It wasn't just a heist. It was a citywide assault, a series of impossible choices designed to stretch their new hero to his absolute breaking point. The day of the heist began with rain. Not a gentle spring shower, but a cold, driving downpour that seemed to suck the color out of the city. At SDR Labs, the mood was quiet. Izuku was in the training area, running simulations Cisco had designed, pushing his control over Float and Blackwhip to new levels. He was still haunted by the power outage, by the councilwoman's words. He had to be better. He had to be more precise. The first alert came from the Central City Bridge, the main artery connecting the downtown core to the western suburbs. Mark Martin's on the bridge, Iris called out from the cortex, her voice tight with urgency. But he's not just making it rain. He's flash freezing the support cables. He's creating a hailstorm with stones the size of baseballs. The bridge's structural integrity is failing. Izuku was already moving, his new suit materializing around him from its storage unit. On my way. Be careful, Izuku, Caitlin warned over the comms as he leaped across the rooftops. This feels too loud, too public for Martin. It feels like a distraction. She was right. As he arrived at the bridge, the scene was pure chaos. Cars were sliding on the icy pavement, massive hailstones shattering windshields. A deep, groaning sound echoed from the bridge's main towers as the supercooled steel contracted and strained. At the center of the storm, Weather Wizard hovered, his staff glowing with power. Deku knew a direct confrontation was what Martin wanted. He had to stabilize the bridge first. He landed on one of the main towers, the icy wind whipping at him. He began to weave a massive cradle of black whip tendrils under the bridge's main span, anchoring them to the bedrock on either side of the river. It was a desperate, monumental effort, a feat of superpowered engineering that took every ounce of his concentration. Just as he secured the final anchor, a second alarm blared in his ear, this one from Cisco. Izuku, we have a problem. A big one. Multiple explosions reported at the waterfront, near the ferry terminal. The police are reporting, it looks like heat wave. Izuku's head snapped up. 2 locations? 2 rogues at once? I can't leave the bridge. He yelled over the wind. It'll collapse if I release these anchors. I know. The police are trying to handle Rory, but he's got them pinned down. It was an impossible choice. Save the hundreds of people on the bridge, or save the dozens at the ferry terminal? He gritted his teeth, his muscles straining to hold the black whip construct together. He had to trust the police. He had to finish the job here first. He turned his attention back to Martin, who was laughing maniacally from the sky. It's too late, hero. This city is about to learn what a real storm looks like. Deku knew he couldn't reach him in the air. Not easily. He had to ground him. He focused, pushing a controlled blast of one for all into the tower beneath his feet. He didn't shatter it. He made it vibrate, sending a powerful seismic shock up the frozen support cables straight towards Martin. The unexpected tremor threw the villain off balance, his concentration faltering for a split second. It was the opening Deku needed. A single, whip-fast tendril of black whip shot up and wrapped around Martin's ankle, yanking him out of the sky. But as Martin fell, a third alert screamed through the comms, Iris's voice frantic and tinged with panic. The financial district. Golden Glider and Mirror Master just hit a convoy of armored cars. They've phased the cars into the side of a building. They're trapped, and the building is destabilizing. 3 simultaneous, high-level threats, spread across miles of city. This wasn't a series of random attacks. This was a coordinated, multi-pronged assault. This was Snart's plan. The realization hit Deku like a physical blow. The hailstorm, the fires, the phased trucks, they were all feints. They were designed to do exactly this, to divide his attention, to force him into making impossible choices, to pull him in 3 directions at once. He was strong, and he was fast. But he wasn't the Flash. He couldn't be everywhere at once. He neutralized the falling Martin with a quick, precise chop to the back of the neck, leaving him for the approaching police. He secured the black whip anchors on the bridge, turning a temporary fix into a semi-permanent one. But precious minutes had been lost. Cisco, where's the real target? He demanded as he launched himself towards the financial district. This is all a distraction. Where are they really hitting? There was a pause, followed by the frantic sound of Cisco typing. I'm cross-referencing the locations. It's a triangulation. They're forming a perimeter. Oh no. At the center of it all is Cord Industries RD. That's the play. That has to be the play. Deku pushed himself harder, leaping across the cityscape, a green comet fueled by desperation. He was too far. They had played him perfectly. They had used his own heroism, his need to save everyone, to ensure their own victory. He arrived at the Corps D facility, a sleek, low-lying campus of concrete and glass, just as a reinforced transport truck was pulling away from a gaping hole blasted in the side of the main lab. Standing by the hole, his cold gun held casually at his side, was Leonard Snart. Mick Rory was in the passenger seat of the truck, giving Deku a lazy, triumphant wave. The other rogues were gone, their distractions having served their purpose. It was just him and Snart. "You're too late, kid," Snart said, his voice calm, the words frosting in the damp air. He wasn't gloating. He was simply stating a fact. "This is over," Deku growled, landing in a crouch, the ground cracking beneath his feet. Green lightning flared around him, his frustration and fury manifesting as a visible aura. "You're right. It is," Snart replied. He didn't raise his gun to fire at Deku. He aimed it at the building's main coolant pipeline. A single, precise blast of absolute zero struck the pipe. The metal instantly became brittle as glass and shattered, releasing a massive cloud of cryogenic gas. It wasn't a lethal attack, but it was a perfect smokescreen, a wall of freezing fog. By the time Deku leaped through the cloud, the truck was peeling out of the complex, and Snart was gone, having slipped away in the confusion. He stood alone in the rain, surrounded by the evidence of his failure. The distant sirens from the 3 separate crime scenes he had just left served as a mocking chorus. He had saved the people on the bridge. He had prevented a catastrophe at the ferry terminal. He had laid the groundwork for the rescue in the financial district. He had saved dozens, maybe hundreds of lives, but he had been outmaneuvered. He had been played. While he was busy being a hero, the villains had won. He looked down at his own hands, the immense power thrumming within them, feeling utterly, completely useless. The weight of the city, of this impossible legacy, had never felt heavier.